Hello, everyone. It's the end of the day, right? So, Ann, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to stand before your membership and hopefully give you some insight on who Joe Lombardo is and what I believe I can do to help small business and the chamber community moving forward. So many of you don't know me in here, so I think it's probably appropriate for me to give you a little insight on Joe Lombardo real quick and tell you what my stance is associated with business environment and what I plan on doing as the next governor. So I was born in Misawa, Japan. I won't tell you how old I am, but you can tell by the gray in my hair. My dad was in the Air Force. That's how I happened to be in Japan. And we ended up in Las Vegas, 1976. Dallas Air Force Base. I went to the local high school there. Upon graduating high school, I went into the United States Army for a period of time. And then I deferred my enlistment to go to UNLV to get my degree and enter into the ROTC program to be an officer in the military. And after graduating college, I went back in, did my obligation as an officer versus enlisted, and eventually ended up back in Las Vegas. So I was working as a civil engineer out in Garden Grove, California. Don't hold that against me for a period of time. A very short period of time, and I did a ride along on the police department down in Las Vegas, and I was hooked. I applied and I was hired in short order, and that was 35 years ago. So I've been working my way up through the department for the last 35 years, and I was elected sheriff in 2015. I was elected in 2014, took office in 2015. And then, so I'm in my second term as the sheriff in Las Vegas at the end of my second term. So, but while I was on police department, I went back to UNLV and got my master's in crisis management. And then, so here we are today. But why are we here today? I think that's probably on the tip of everybody's mind and why I'm making this endeavor. So, like I said, I was at the end of my second term. And I had to make a decision, run for office again, go into the private sector, or continue with service. And so COVID hit. COVID hit our jurisdiction, our state, and our nation. And there was a certain response to COVID that I basically didn't agree with. And I think that response is self-evident. And it led to the closure of, in the state of Nevada, per the Lieutenant Governor, 95,000 small businesses here across the state. And I think we could have done a little bit different, a little bit better in that aspect when we knew what we knew in short order. We didn't know what we didn't know in the early throws, just like everybody else, but we did know in short order. So I was like, so that really bothered me in the state that I knew. And then you move forward past COVID, and then all of the responsibility that's associated with state government. The departments of state government, you know, DEER and Department of Administration and DMV and public safety and healthcare. I didn't see the job getting done. And more importantly, I didn't see people at work. And you appreciate that, right? You told me a couple interesting stories. I don't know if they're funny, I think they're bad, but you conveyed to me some interesting stories with the failure of government. And there's been a significant change in the attitude of the state government, in my opinion, to where it's working for itself versus the people. And, you know, especially when we talk about small businesses and the success of the economy and the diversification of the economy. In my opinion, it's been horrible. It's been non-functioning, and we're in a little bit of a quandary here, a keystone time in our history in the state of Nevada on the direction we're going. And unfortunately, if I am not successful, I think we're in a little bit of trouble. We're in a little bit of trouble because without the need to speak to the voters, I think some decisions will be made that are detrimental to what we expect out of state government. So that made my decision to put my name in the hat and run. So then we went through a contested primary. We were successful, and it brings us here today. We're 14 days out from the general. The polling data is looking very positive in my aspect, and hopefully we are successful come November 8th. So if I am successful come November 8th, what can you expect from me? in the business community and northern Nevada to include southern Nevada and to include the entire state. So you're fully aware, I'm sure, as an organization, I did not get the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce endorsement. And I think that is part and parcel to what's the problem with the state. Steve says like caters to labor and he caters to big business, not small business. And I believe wholeheartedly, and what I do know is big business twisted his arm or twisted their arm and convinced them to endorse Steve Sisolak. So if you look outside of Las Vegas Chamber, I've been endorsed by all the other chambers across the state, and I know this chamber does not endorse, but you're as important as the rest of them because of your force multiplier with all the different chambers you have under your roof, right? And then you speak for the entire rest of the state, which is a significant portion of the business community and the success of the state of Nevada. So the Asian Chamber of Commerce, the Latin Chamber of Commerce, to include the Henderson Chamber of Commerce, have all endorsed me because of my communication and outreach on a constant basis, granted it's in the law enforcement space, throughout time, and the ability to communicate with them and have an ear to listen to what their particular problems are that is prohibiting or preventing success of their business. And now I think it bears repeating when I say that Steve Sisolak is more concerned about labor, organized labor, and big business versus the success of what we are here today dealing with. And what has changed since then? What has changed since we came through the pandemic in your space? What has changed? Has the communication increased? I would say no, from what I do know. Is the opportunities increase? I would say no. Is workforce development increase? I would say no. And what you're directly related to in state government, be it DEETR and workforce connection, has that been more organized or beneficial or moving forward? The answer to my question, my perception is no. So why would anybody expect anything different in the next 4 years? Other than building government bigger than it should be? Why has the regulatory environment not changed? It hasn't changed to your benefit. It's actually getting worse. The tax environment is an unknown with this governor. He says he has not done a tax or a fee or a resolution in his first term. We know that's not true. I can name 3 different occasions for that. It's been opposite of what he's professing in his campaign. But my campaign is standing on its 2 feet and promises, and hopefully those promises mean something because I've always met my promises in my tenure as a sheriff in Clark County. And I intend to continue to do that into the future. So you got a stable tax environment, a beneficial, business-friendly regulatory environment, and a workforce development atmosphere that we can occupy those jobs that we dearly need. And quite often when we talk about economic diversity and development, we quite often talk about bringing outside companies into our space. And more importantly, to speak directly to you is, I think it's important we build our existing companies that we have in the state of Nevada and the workforce associated with them and the benefit or the ability to provide them training for success outside of being worried about in the long term bringing other companies into the space. And that's what I stand for. And that's what I hope to do. So my platform in totality outside of the business space is stable tax environment, stable regulatory environment, less regulatory environment, business licensure ease, occupational licensing ease, and diversification of the economy, with existing businesses in mind first and foremost. Second is education, workforce development, change in the education space that we can occupy those positions that you're hoping to fill through the process. And then last but not least is safety. And that's in the law and order space and ensure that this is a good community, safe community that people want to be here and have a nice quality of life to be successful into the future. That's Joe Lombardo. Happy to answer any question. And I'm sorry, I didn't look whether I was on time or not.
Got plenty. You're good.
Questions?
Sheriff Hill,
Always the first one out of the box.
months about you, so past experiences where you basically worked from ground level up on some of your projects as a sheriff, bringing something that was grassroots up through and and how you work with adversarial relationships, because that's what politics is these days. And how are you gonna work to make sure that you're, moving across the aisle, to make sure things get done? It's not about E or R, it's about working with people with that.
Right. You're exactly right. So efficiency and effectiveness is the first question, right? And an example of that, well, example I'll give you, because no matter if it's law enforcement agency or not, it's still a big business. So to give you some understanding of the breadth of LVNPD is I have 6,000 employees and I have a $1.3 billion budget. Okay, so it's my responsibility to administrate that, right? It's not the law enforcement piece. I'm the head administrator, ensure success with everything that goes along with your employee concerns and your business and balancing the budget and throughout the process. So one of the things that we do as part of law enforcement is investigate crime, right? And so when I took over as the sheriff, we had a silo process in investigating those crimes, and everything that was done in the field at the ground level funneled into a funnel, and it was all addressed by a detective function, which it was not timely or quality, at a short order after the crime took place. And we had a very poor performance level to the tune of 7% solvability in totality. So in my jurisdiction, my authority, right around 50,000 crimes, felonious crimes on an annual basis. So 7% of 50,000, you're bankrupt. Basically, you're bankrupt. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. So on the outside looking in, how can we be more effective and efficient? We did some decentralization. We put all those investigative functions out into the area commands with smaller geography and more, more timely responsibility and ownership versus apathy to the victim. And right now we're pushing 36% solvability. So that would be an example I give you in the business space and understanding the business space, a better way to do business and looking at things from the ground up. Because you can easily say that that's the way we've always done it, right? In law enforcement, and you don't have to change that way. But we're in the customer service business, which I think the state has lost sight of that as being in the customer service business. And so we've been successful in that space. So the second part of your question is how are you going to get across the aisle, right? And how are you going to communicate and collaborate? Well, that's proof that my team hates this when I say proof in the pudding. But I will say the proof is in the pudding is I've had to deal with strictly a Democratic County Commission and Las Vegas City Council, and which are responsible for 100% of my budget, and been successful in negotiating those. And the whole key to that is communication. Communication on the front end versus the back end, and willing to look at it objectively for the benefit of the whole versus, in this case, and granted my position as the sheriff is not partisan, but whatever my personal beliefs are not part of the problem or part of the issue or part of the process. The idea is that to stand back and make it for the benefit of the whole, ensure that everybody benefits, not the minority, whatever my particular view is.
Other questions?
It's a problem solving model, right? Analyze it, figure out a response and then assess it afterwards. And I think that if you use that model in any problem solving, you will be successful. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Sheriff. One of the most important things that the governor does is to put the budget together.
Right.
And so we've got some economic forum that Bill has to give you guidance. Your experience has been largely in law enforcement space, and although you have, I'm sure you have health expenses and, other things that are included in there, where do you anticipate finding the experience in those other areas that you might not have firsthand knowledge about? The budget, it's Medicaid and education and a lot of aspects.
Environment, right, economy and education. Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think it's very simple. I can't know everything, right? Even if I was the governor for the last 20 years, I'm still not going to know everything, right? So you have to rely on the expertise and the knowledge base within that space, and that's how you build team building, right? I think what happens a lot of times is people overwhelm themselves by trying to get into the weeds on all the nuances of government and what they're all responsible for and everything else on it. And you don't have the capacity to do that, right? Nor do you have the time to do that. So you have to build a team to help you advise on that. Now, the important piece is putting the right people on the bus, right? And the people that have subject matter expertise in that space and putting them on the team and trusting them, all right? Until you lose the trust in them, by a faulty decision. But, one of the lines I always use is paralysis through analysis. We quite often do that in law enforcement, and I think businesses suffer, and any form of government suffers in the paralysis through analysis. And every once in a while, you got to pull your ears once you feel you have sufficient amount of information. To answer your question is relying on the folks that you surround yourself with and ensure they're the right folks that you're surrounding yourself with to move it. So you're not bogged down, you move it sooner than later.
It's just a short period of time that you have to do that.
Well, yeah, in reference to budget, and granted, the budget won't be my budget, right? The majority of it, 3/4 of it will be the previous governor's budget. So, but you'll still have time throughout the process as the legislature deconstructs it and bring what your vision is and what you believe in would be a benefit to the state into that process. Granted, you won't be able to use all the dollars, but you can make movement on some of the dollars. And there is going to be $100 million surplus reference to federal stimulus monies. And today's numbers, we're looking at $100 million surplus in the general.
Thank you.
Actually, my question has to do with Nevada revenue. And by the way, thank you for attending today and accepting the invitation. It says something about you that you were here.
Why is this a scary place?
That's really talking about that after hours. But I read an article on the 14th that actually Nevada revenue is exceeding projections by $1 billion, which would be quite the windfall.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
And which I think it is great. Now you've laid out a plan for Nevada, which has sort of 4 points to it: fixing our education system, which you mentioned, restoring law and order. Gee, I wonder why. Building a stronger economy and expanding affordable housing. I think all admirable things to do. I am curious with that $1 billion windfall, essentially tax dollars, our tax dollars. If you are elected governor, what would you do with that $1 billion? Would that be put into like a rainy day fund? Would it be directed at perhaps some of these points that some of your plans for Nevada, or would it, unfortunately, we see perhaps in other states that it gets diverted to God knows what, that isn't really helping the state long term?
Right, and that's the problem with a lot of this federal stimulus money. You're looking with short-term money for long-term solutions, right? And that's some of the issues I have with how that money is being distributed currently. An example I'll give you, and I'll get back to your question here in short order. Right now, the state has 25% across the board vacancy, unfilled employment positions, right? And so through the IFC recently, and with the distribution of one of the tranches of monies they did here last week, was they put in, I believe it was 161 more state positions into that. So you have a salary and a benefit package that goes in perpetuity with those positions, but you haven't filled the 25,000, right? So why couldn't you use that 161 to the benefit of the people of Nevada? To your question, right? So in my thought process on that, first and foremost, is the safety of our jurisdiction. So you look at the state police, they have a 35% vacancy factor. And our highway system is probably the most unsafe it's ever been in our history in the state of Nevada, because we've broken some records on fatal accidents. So we got to get some salary benefit into those people's hands, and we got to get some filled positions on that. Then you look at the Department of Corrections that the governor is responsible for. There's over a 40% vacancy factor to where they're closing down facilities and moving staff into other facilities because of safety issues for the inmates and the employees. So you got to get some tranche of money into that. So overall safety and concerns, which I think builds the economy. Okay. And the second, we have a very big issue in the healthcare system. and that is Medicaid reimbursement, and the doctors, not leaving the state of Nevada, you want to convince them to stay in the state of Nevada. But yet, our current governor wants to shove this public option down everybody's throat, and they've been professing in the media, in data, that it's gonna save individuals so many hundreds of millions of dollars, but what it's gonna do is gonna drive more doctors to leave our space because of the reimbursement model. So I think the priority is, how can we get the money back into the hands of the taxpayers? And two, what is an example of that, Sheriff? Well, it could be deferred car registration. Everybody has to register a car, right? And that's a significant amount of money. It could be, a tax holiday where we benefit you on that space. There's a lot of things where you can look at without legislative approval, that the governor has some semblance of authority over, that where you can put money back in your pocket. But more importantly, is healthcare and safety is my first order of business.
Thank you.
I have a question. Would you order the state employees back to work?
Hopefully you've heard me say that on the platform, right? So for your information for this audience, there's over 5,000 state employees still working from home. All right, so if you have to have business done with the state, I guarantee you, this has been the response. You call and you get a voicemail that says, due to the COVID protocols, we are still working from home, and please send us an email. You can't do business that way, right? You can't put eyes on, here's an example, your dispatchers for your state police are working from home. So I don't know how comfortable you feel about calling 911 and you know that they're working from home. I mean, and the excuse that I've heard is because they're afraid if they force them to come back to work, they would quit. Well, I would want those employees to quit if that's their measurement tool, or that's the standard that they're working under. So first order of business, is get them back to work. Get them back to work. I've been working since day one. The entire police department's been working since day one. So. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you again, Sheriff Lombardo, for coming and meeting with us.
Sure,
You
absolutely.
met, and I'm excited to meet you again. As you know, Northern Nevada Literacy Council, we focus on literacy and helping our communities build those, get the high school equivalencies. Currently, right now, we have 132 youth that we're working with out of school youth, and we're ranked 49th in education. And, when it comes to workforce, I'm sure everybody here would agree, it's very difficult to get that workforce if we don't start increasing our outcomes on education, so that we can promote these youth to want to go into training, want to join our workforce and build our economy. And I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but it's a big plan. But at a high level, what does that look like to you?
As far as workforce development,
And literacy.
and education and totality, well, first and foremost, we have a safety issue in the schools. Hopefully you're not saying, well, the police officer, he keeps default to safety, but I think safety is totality of a functioning society, right? And a quality of life. And a lot of that revolves around that and your business model and everything else that you deal with. So for, safety, there was really bad legislation that was brought forward in the last session, is called restorative justice. And that's where you get counseling versus discipline in the education environment. So teachers don't want to be in the environment, students don't want to be in the environment. So that's first and foremost. We have to fix that particular issue. The second piece is salaries for teachers. The governor talks about a one-time increase in salary 3 years ago. And if you include inflation in that space, they're probably 9% underwater since that salary increase. And a lot of times everybody says, well, the answer to education isn't always throwing money at it, right? Well, you got to have educators to be part of the solution, right? They're leaving in droves because of their quality of life and affordable housing, right? And the ability to even have a place to live here and have a successful life and want to go into that space. So you got to grow your own as far as your educators. School choice has been a big part of my platform, and ability to not be restricted by your zip code, but what school you want your kid to occupy, to include voucher systems so you can expand upon that school choice. And the governor has said that I want to decrease the education system by $300 million. I don't know where he got that. Okay, so I'm trying to surmise that statement he's made, and so what they're saying is the voucher system is gonna cost the, education system $300 million. All right, to implement it, and the Supreme Court says that we can't do it until we find a revenue stream. I believe is existing revenue streams, to help in that space, and this young man right here just talked about $1 billion, right? And for your information, there is $300 million surplus in the education account today for the state. It hasn't been addressed, or it hasn't been utilized moving into that space. So part of that is workforce development, right? So you can use that, some of that revenue, some of that money to increase upon the footprint of workforce development. So a lot of the complaints of the trades, the construction trades and whatever it may be, is they don't receive that workforce development now until they get into post K through 12. Use through the community college or programs like yours. And we need to hit them earlier, into the K through 12 education. And one of the biggest issues is apprenticeships. You know, can we push the apprenticeship programs into K through 12 to expand upon that? Yes, I say yes, and they get credit for it, and they don't have to go unpaid when they actually occupy that job, trying to get through the apprenticeship program. So you're cutting the timeline with that exponentially into the future. And, you know, when I went into secondary education, not secondary, but high school, they had workforce across the template, across the foundation of the fabric of all of the education in Clark County. Now it's in satellites, and there's a limited number of positions with that. And, you know, it was no fault of anybody else, because they thought computers were going to solve everybody's problems, right? But they forgot you had to fix things, right? And you had to occupy jobs that support the entire economy, just not portions of it. And we're starting to see the error of that, but we've been slow to act on it. And I think that the answer to your long-term verbose answer to your question is we got to make it a priority. And you hit on one little key thing in there that I noticed was you were talking about attendance versus performance. That's something that has to be changed by the Department of Education. So the education system has gone to an attendance versus performance, you know, testing to prevent you from moving on, or to say that, you know, they have a 90+% graduation rate. That's so they can ensure they get federal money to supplement the budget, right? And we're all suffering as a result of that attitude. And we're just pushing kids through the system, and they're not even in the 8th grade level, right? And they've gone through the high school system. I think it's sad for the benefit of just trying to figure out how you receive. And, you know, if you step back and look, and I said this when I stood up here a minute ago, 4 years ago to today, 49, we're still 49. So what are we going to do different? Right? So the answer to your question is what you asked. And hopefully I provided. Yes, sir.
So there's, in the last legislative session and previous years, there have been 3 things that I think that, you know, negatively affect business. One, you mentioned the collective or the public option. Second one being collective bargaining for law enforcement. And then
For
third,
what? For law enforcement?
collective bargaining for law enforcement.
Well, that's always been in place. You're probably saying for state employees, right, in totality, right?
Right.
Okay.
Something that was vetoed by the last Democratic government. And the third thing that a lot of people don't know about is that from January 1, if you get a traffic ticket, it will no longer be a criminal offense. It will be a civil offense. And so, you know, I work a lot with the judges and stuff, and they have a lot of concerns about that because they fund the courts a lot with those fees, the administrative fees. If you break the law, you have to pay for the crime. How would you go about in a democratically controlled, maybe the Senate's not democratically controlled, potentially repealing those or fixing those, or is the big red pen going to come out and use your veto power to fix some of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. But hopefully it won't go to that. And to build on gentleman back there's question was communication on the front end. I know Mr. Sisolak's leadership style is to free will. I won't provide you any direction or vision, but I'll make a decision when a bill hits my desk, right? And that's the problem when you have a single party rule. There's no discourse, there's no, you know, discussion, there's no argument and eventual consensus. Hopefully, you know, the fabric of our government throughout history, is hopefully you don't address that on the front end, communication. And if you can't, and making them aware of what your position is and what you stand for and what you believe in, and don't waste my time with bills that is gonna eventually end up with a red pen. Make sure you have the wherewithal and the fortitude to utilize the red pen. And you are right when you describe the traffic situation, with the changing behavior. You know, just recently, or was it 2 weeks ago, you had the takeover of the racers in the intersections up here in Reno. Stuff you never experienced before. You know why? Because there's no negative discipline associated with your action. And today, and what the court has done, you say January, but what they have done is they've thrown all those criminal cases aside, waiting for January. They're not even prosecuting them, and that's been in the works for over a year. Prior to a year, the courts were closed, so then you had a backlog. So that's why you're seeing a significant increase in crime to include traffic issues. So that is a big deal. And so what can the governor do? If you think it's detrimental in perpetuity into the future, do everything you can within your power to carry a bill to repeal it.
It's nice.
That's time.
All right.
Thank you.